and our most important source of information. And it tells us in very clear, precise, wonderful, direct language that the worship of God, to be the Abdullah, to be Ibadullah, to be the servant or servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the worship of Allah is connected in this world to the interests of justice. And Imam has already shared one of the most important verses that proves that. There is another verse which we don't tend to quote, but I'm going to share it. Allah says, شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة وأولو العلم قائما بالقسط لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم. Allah says that you know how when we become a Muslim, what do? You say something called Shahada, a public acknowledgement that Allah alone is His worship and that Muhammad was His messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Well, Allah has His own Shahada, and His Shahada, pay attention to the wording. شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة وأولو العلم قائما بالقسط. That God's own Shahada is that He alone is His worship. And He says this is the declaration of not only Himself, but this is the declaration of angels and those who have knowledge, قائما بالقسط, standing forth for justice or standing in justice. So the Islamic program is that knowledge of Allah, the one only God, is the most important foundation. This is how the verse begins. It begins with Tawheed. Now, so understanding God correctly, the concept of God, understanding this correctly will serve for proper pillars or proper foundations later on. Thus, in Islam, we say this every day when we pray. I hope we're praying every day. We say every day the Fatiha. Not only do we say the Fatiha, or not only do we have access to the Fatiha, we also have access. I see the majority of people here are Muslims and know the references I'm making. We also have Ayatul Kursi. We also have Ayatul Nur. Chapter 24, verse 35 talks about God's light. We have Surah Al-Ikhlas. We have these famous references which tell us about the reality of Allah, what constitutes Allah. And all these texts are telling us that God is caring, compassionate, loving, omnipotent, and omnipresent, and that His care and provision extends to all. Look at the Fatiha. Let me go back to the Fatiha. Alhamdulillah, how does it end? Rabbil Alameen. It doesn't say Rabbil Muslimin, or even Rabbil Mu'mineen, or Rabbil this people, or Rabb of that people. It says Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And Allah is Rabb, the one who cares for. This is how I render it. The caretaker of everyone and everything in this universe. Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Continuing on, look at how the Quran presents the prophets of Allah, alayhi wassalam. We have individuals or prophets, I shouldn't say individuals, we have prophets such as Nuh alayhi salam, or Noah in English, Shu'aib, Salih. You know, these are prophets that we normally don't talk about. Okay? We don't normally talk about it. When's the last time you heard a khutbah about Salih alayhi salam or Nuh alayhi salam? Read their stories in the Quran. These are prophets that are speaking truth to power. And in the Quran, the elites, there's always the elites who oppose the message of the prophets. And they're called al-Mala'. When you read it in the Quran, they're called by the expression al-Mala'. So, do we think that the communication of God comes forth just to put us in a masjid and to have nice carpets and to wear these nice hats? It's a nice hat in that way, isn't it? Is this what religion has come to do, for us to wear nice hats? No. Allah's communications to His prophets have not only the imperative to worship correctly or to seek God correctly, but it has within it calls for a change in the social order of their respective communities. Again, seeing that the majority of the people here are Muslims, read how many people in this room have a Quran. Oh good, we don't have to give out any. Read Surah Al-Anbiya. This is chapter number 21. Read parts of Surah Al-Hijr, which is the 15th surah of the Quran. And many other chapters. The prophets are speaking against things. There are certain things that are highlighted in the Quran. The prophets of Allah are speaking against things such as fraud. They are speaking against things such as tyranny and exploitation of the masses. And the biggest story of truth to power is Moses and the Pharaoh. This is the biggest example in the Quran. Musa alayhi salam and the Pharaoh. This teaching, we even find it in the scriptures that is associated with the prophets that came before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The story of in the New Testament, the story of Jesus alayhi salam, he goes into the temple. And he finds the money changers in the temple. And what does he do according to the story? He turns over the tables. He overturns the tables. He takes action against the exploiters. This is what he does according to the New Testament. Let's go to the final prophet, upon whom we ask for Allah's peace and blessings. The final prophet, the universal prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's doing the exact same thing. He could have been, and I wrote this down. He could have been a hipster, liberal, chic person. Do we think that the kuffar would have opposed him if he had just had a different way of praying, a different idea about God? Not really. Why did they oppose him? They opposed him because his message is a message of justice, is a message of equity within society. So, referring to the ayah, شَهِدَ اللَّهُ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ وَالْعِلْمُ قَائِمًا بِالْقِسْطِ. Some thoughts about that. The one who is truly connected as much as possible to Allah cannot be a party to injustice. And this will in turn see his or her duty to actually do something about it according to their capacities. Shaykh was mentioning about the expression abid. I can guarantee you that the person who says abid has very little knowledge of the Quran. And God willing, when they attain that knowledge, they'll stop this stupid practice. So these are not only external battles. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught what we would today refer to as social consciousness. There is a very beautiful hadith, and it's in the two authoritative sources, Bukhari and Muslim. And it's narrated on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. It tells us that the Prophet, peace be upon him, I'm only going to quote part of the hadith. He says, pay attention to the words of this hadith. Forgive me, it is a little long, so I've skipped some of it, omitted some parts of it. It's important to mention because sometimes if we don't mention it, we may misrepresent the hadith. So it's important to always mention these things. So the Prophet is reported to have said that bringing about justice between two parties, that is an act of sadaqah. He says, helping a man get on his horse, this is an act of sadaqah. He says, a good word is a sadaqah. He says, every step you take towards prayers, so you drove to the Muslim center, you put your shoes outside, and you enter into the musalla, and you offer your prayer. The Prophet said that every step you make towards prayer is an act of sadaqah. Finally, he says, and removing a harmful thing from the road is sadaqah. Have we heard this hadith before? Now we're hearing the full hadith, or the majority of the hadith. But this hadith is pointing us or directing us towards having a sense of social responsibility. And the sense of social responsibility is felt in almost all actions a believer is to take. And this, of course, improves the believer. This, of course, let's put it another way, this enriches the life, enriches the morals, and enriches the thinking of the believer. So this is education with the ilm. This is education. This is knowledge, the cultivation of good behavior. The Prophet says that I have not come except to bring forth the cultivation of good manners. So the Quran as well as the Sunnah teach about, or I should say, try to direct us against having wrong thinking and wrong action. So it talks against something called racism. I was telling somebody on the phone yesterday that I hate racism in all forms. It doesn't matter who the victim is or the perpetrator is. Every time I hear it, it just annoys the hell out of me. You're not going to be mad at me that I said the word hell, are you? Thank you. So this religion speaks against racism. It speaks against the worship of anyone or anything other than Almighty Allah. It also speaks against consumerism. Read Surah Al-Kahf. It speaks against consumerism. But it also tells us in Surah Al-Hujurat, chapter number 49, it tells us about the ills of such things as backbiting, of jealousy, and of promiscuous behavior. And there's more I can say, but this is just the theological side, so I'm going to try to make this quick. We have two more aspects. The second contribution is looking at examples in other societies. And I will have to begin with the Messenger of Allah himself, the final Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The prophetic career of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was 23 years. But in that time, he was able to remove riba from the economic system. And how did he do it? The main way he did it is, you look at the final speech of the Prophet. We quote certain parts of his speech, but in almost the beginning of the speech, he says that I renounce the interest that's owed to my family. See, there are people who owe his family money. And he says, I renounce that. You know, don't worry about the interest, etc. And so this is a personal example, but also what he did for his audience, for the early Muslims, is that he inculcated in them having true faith in Allah. That true faith to be felt and to be lived by Muslims, by those who are submitting to Allah. And so he worked very hard also to deal with the issue that Imam emphasized about Asiriyah. You can call it as clannish fanaticism, tribalism as words. You could even call it gangsterism if you want. Bloods and Crips, or Eagles and Calves. He not only preached about God, but he preached about women's rights. He forbade things such as female infanticide, and he emphasized patience and charity. I'm trying to make this quick, but there is a book I want to read some excerpts from. In this book, I think everybody should get this book who are interested in these subjects, especially if they're interested in African American history. There's a book called Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race. These are not my words, this is the title of the book. And the author is Edward Blyden. Edward Blyden was a Christian missionary who traveled throughout the African continent, and he details his experiences. Now, this book is written, the first published in 1888. So I think if you find it on Amazon, you might find some still in print. So I want to share a couple of quotations. Actually, let me just share just two. So he says, when we left a pagan, meaning pagan area, when we left a pagan area and entered a Muhammadan community, because you know back then, Muslims were called Muhammadans by these people. They called us Muhammadans. When we left a pagan and entered a Muhammadan community, we had once noticed that we had entered a moral atmosphere. Listen to these words. This is not a Muslim. This is a Christian missionary. An honest Christian missionary, Christian scholar. We entered a moral atmosphere widely separated from and loftier far than the one we had left. We discovered that the character, feeling, and conditions of the people were profoundly altered and improved. This is page 7 of the book. There are a couple of other quotations, but I'm actually going to skip it in the interest of time. But this is a book that you should purchase if you can. So, the spread of Islam through the world is not a military venture. It spread in Southeast Asia, in Far Asia, as well as parts of Western Europe, and even to certain extents in West Africa and East Africa. Because how did it spread? One of the ways it spread is that Muslims were good business people. So Muslim business people from different areas would come. They wanted their money. But their ethics, their business ethic was so strong that it impressed the locals. It impressed the locals and impacted them in essence, the customers accepted the religion of the businessman. And obviously this is benefit, this is a long-lasting impact. So social justice, I said that to say this, that social justice is not limited to going and having protests. It is also a character-building exercise in personal growth, which translates into the wider world. Finally, and this is very short, is what should our role be within our society? I think that our keynote speaker will talk about this more. So our role, I think, should be the same role as that of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the early Meccan period, as well as the early Medinan period. In Mecca, he preached the message, and he mainly attracted those on the bottom side of the social order. He wasn't doing what we do. We go back and to the politicians and to the rich people. He wasn't doing like that. That wasn't his minhaj. He was the main people that he was preaching to and having success with are those who are at the bottom of the social order. And as we mentioned, he also, like the sunnah of the prophets before him, alayhi salam, he also spoke truth to power. And as the Imam mentioned, the Quran speaks about justice. One of the verses he didn't mention, and I'll just allude to it, God says to stand for justice even against your own selves, your own people, your own family. Stand for justice even if it's against them, rich or poor. So we should be consistent in our values and be consistent in our ethics. We really should. We should be involved in finding housing for the poor. We should be involved in fighting the devils of drugs, and the devil of alcoholic abuse, and the devil of consumerism. We should be cleaning up our neighborhoods and be visible in any of the activities that are happening within our community, whether the people are Muslim or not. Islam has always had a strong link to the justice movement in American society, directly and indirectly. I'm not going to give you the details of that because most of you already know, and undoubtedly our speaker will share some thoughts about that. There is another book that I would like to recommend. I recommend this book, but there's another book, and I don't have it with me. I think it's actually overseas. It's called Islam, Black Nationalism and Slavery. If you're writing this or reporting it, please write it down. Islam, Black Nationalism and Slavery. And it's by an author named Adib Rashad. And it is a wonderful source of information about this subject, about the role of Muslims in, and I don't like to use the word civil rights movement. I think human rights movement is a better term, or the justice movement may be a better term. I think you should be able to find it, should still be in print. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah ta'ala, thank you very much, Shamsuddin. We're going to have Shaikh Yahya, Abdul Karim Yahya. He resides in our community and he participates in the Imam and he commits a lot. So inshallah ta'ala, it's an honor to have him as well amongst the speakers. So inshallah, with that being said, Shaikh Yahya, please proceed.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. Allah revealed on the tongue of Yunus, he said, there is no God except you. Glory to you, or transcendent are you. Verily I was from the wrongdoers, or I was from the oppressors. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa tabi'ina lahum bi ihsanan ila yawm al-din. وَعَلَيْنَا مَعَهُمْ وَفِيهِمْ بِرَحْمَتِكَ يَا أَرْحَمَ الرَّاحِمِينَ. We ask Allah that these prayers be upon us, with the Prophet ﷺ and his companions and family, with them and among them, by Allah's mercy, and Allah is the most merciful of the merciful. Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. Just to begin with Allah's word and some of the speech of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and inshallah towards the end we'll mention the circumstance where this was manifest in this physical plane. وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. And say, truth has come and falsehood has perished. Verily or surely falsehood is perishing. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. Or in another riwayah, Salih al-Akhlaq. And this is Sahih, it's narrated in the Muwatta, the Mustadrak of Hakim and others. Surely I was only sent. And this particle, innama, it's a particle of limitation or hasar, right? So when that particle appears in a sentence, it limits the meaning to what's mentioned after it and gives emphasis to that meaning. So you could translate this as surely I was only sent. Surely I was only sent to perfect or complete moral character. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ, and he's our Imam in everything we do. In everything we do, he's our Imam. He, in one tradition, summarizes his message as coming to perfect moral character, ﷺ. And I have to confess that normally we have a class on the Prophet ﷺ's description at this time, on Saturday at 1:30, and alhamdulillah, some of the aunties who are regular students are present. So I believe that in courtesy towards us, because the talk conforms to the time of our class, I was asked to speak on the panel. However, I just got back from Jordan, so I didn't get the call until last night that I was going to speak today. So some of my comments may be somewhat anecdotal or relatively briefly prepared, but inshallah we ask Allah to make benefit. So I was reflecting on what we were going to speak about. And honestly, I was surprised at the topic of social justice. I was somewhat surprised because the term social justice warrior has become a pejorative term, right? Social justice warrior in the post 2011 is a pejorative term, even if in the late 1900s it was still a praiseworthy term, right? And this connects to our talk, and that is, frankly, the lack of morality in the movement has given it a bad name. The lack of what we bring to any civilization that we enter, which is prophetic character, the absence of that has given the movement a bad name. So if you look at the Urban Dictionary, right, which is like a dictionary of young people essentially defining things as they experience it, the most popular definition is a social justice warrior, a person who uses the fight for civil rights as an excuse to be rude, condescending, and sometimes violent for the purpose of relieving their frustrations or validating their sense of unwarranted moral superiority. So if we look at many of our young people that got caught up in social justice activity in the last 2 years, is our conduct, I say our younger Muslims, I'm not one of the seniors yet, although I'm getting there, is our conduct online, and we're claiming to participate in movement or establishment of something good, and good has to be a truth which conforms to prophecy if we are doing so as Muslims. Is our conduct online moral, prophetic, indicative of values, indicative of manners, or is it rude? Are we respecting the scholars in our community, the elders in our community, men and women respecting each other, or week after week are we tearing down the elders of our community, even if we disagree with them, as was referenced? We might disagree with the statement by a given elder, for instance, on an issue of race. That's one thing, but to tear that elder down, or to disparage them, or defame them, is something quite different, and prophetic values would demand of us that we not do so. Right? So I was reflecting on the topic of social justice, and I actually grew up in Berkeley, California, and some of my youth was in Oakland, California. Right? And I grew up around activists. My mother was in the labor movement. She also participated in the push for the University of California to divest from South Africa when apartheid was still in existence, and various movements. I went to Nicaragua as a guest of Sandinistas when I was in 4th grade. So I grew up around revolutionaries, and many of the elders when I embraced Islam were former Panthers. My high school, I went to a private high school for 1 year in Oakland, and Erica Huggins, who was one of the Panthers, was our principal. And what I saw from those elders, particularly those that were Panthers, and that's specific to the African American community, but just generally among the activists, was a lack of morality. Frankly, there is a lack of morality in the ranks of those movements. There's also a lack of reverence. Like, again, it's one thing to disagree with an elder or a leader or a statesman, but it's another thing to behave in a manner which is rude or irreverent towards them. The reference was made of Fir'aun, right? Fir'aun is how we speak truth to power, and Moses was ordered, go to him and speak to him gently, right? So our social justice warriors, are they speaking gently? Or are they prophetically, or are we speaking another way, right? So if I was going to make a contribution, my contribution is that, if we are to make a contribution to social justice, economic justice, human rights, civil rights, anything in this country, that it has to be in conformity to prophetic values, and that demands of us that we be people who try to adopt and embody and share with others who we're working with akhlaq, morality and human character, values such as chastity, right? Values as respect for elders, mercy for the young, honor of our scholars, kindness to parents, right? And if we look at the conduct that takes place, in the ranks of many of these movements, unfortunately, we depart from that. My daughters from my first marriage, they reside now in the Bay Area, and during the Occupy movement, and we were pleased with them, and we kind of let them do it. They were in the camp with the Occupy protest in Oakland, and actually by Allah's permission, brought some young people out of those camps as Muslims who took Shahada with them. And we met so we stay in touch with some of these young Muslim activists, and we asked them, how is it going? And they said, a lot of them have broken off from the activities. Why? Because the conduct between the young activists that they were associated with has become so base that they didn't want to be involved anymore. And what was it? It was something like someone broke up with someone's girlfriend or boyfriend, and this person was a part of this cause, and that person was a part of that cause. So therefore, if you're at all associated with that cause, because this breakup took place, they're going to disassociate from you. Again, the absence of character, right? The absence of morality, that is, essentially what is lacking. So I would say that that we have to be people that we come with a message bringing the character of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and seeking to share that. And if we're going to engage, and when we engage and how we engage, always it has to be governed by that. Another thing, and again, this is on perhaps the cutting edge of the discussion among our activists.